The worst mistake I made wasn't trusting her. It was hearing what she sounded like when she thought I'd never hear her at all. Because once that happens, once you hear somebody speak about you honestly, accidentally, with no performance left in their voice, you can't ever fully return to the version of them you loved before. There's a voicemail on my phone. I still have it. And before you say it, yes, I know that's unhealthy. I know normal people probably would have deleted it immediately. My sister told me to delete it. My therapist suggested maybe it was keeping me stuck. Even my daughter said, gently, "Mom, why are you still doing this to yourself?" I didn't have a good answer for any of them. I still don't. Because the truth is, that voicemail is the only thing I know for certain was real. That's the part one can't explain to people without sounding a little insane. I listen to it sometimes late at night. Usually when I can't sleep. Which is often now. 3 in the morning, kitchen light on, standing there barefoot replaying 90 seconds of audio like it's evidence in a murder trial. Sometimes I tell myself I'm listening for clues. But honestly, I think I'm listening because part of me still hopes I misunderstood it. Like maybe if I hear it enough times, one sentence will magically rearrange itself into something survivable. It never does. Her voice never changes. Mine did, though. After that voicemail, mine changed permanently. Okay. I need to say this carefully because I've spent 3 years trying to explain something I still don't fully understand myself. I don't completely know what happened. I know that sounds ridiculous because obviously I lived through it. But there are parts of this story I only figured out afterward. Backward. Like reconstructing a house fire from smoke stains. And when you do that long enough, your own memories start feeling unstable. That's what nobody tells you. You don't just lose trust in the person. You lose trust in your interpretation of reality. You start replaying conversations from 10 years earlier while brushing your teeth. You start waking up at 4 in the morning because your brain suddenly reclassifies an old memory as suspicious. You stop feeling safe inside your own certainty. That happened to me. Her name was Carla. God. Even now my chest tightens saying her name out loud. We met when I was 32. I was exhausted all the time back then. Working constantly. Barely sleeping. Holding together a marriage that already felt emotionally dead but hadn't officially collapsed yet. You know when a relationship technically still exists but emotionally it's just paperwork and routine? That was my marriage. And then Carla appeared. Funny. Sharp. Warm in this almost aggressive way. Like she decided immediately that you mattered and somehow made you believe it too. She had this ability to make people feel chosen. I didn't recognize how dangerous that could be at the time. Back then it just felt wonderful. Like relief. Like finally meeting someone who understood me without needing every detail explained first. We became close fast. Too fast, probably. But when you're lonely in a very adult, hidden kind of way, intimacy feels like oxygen. And I was lonely. I don't think I admitted that fully back then, but I can now. Carla filled space in my life I didn't even realize was empty. We talked constantly. Every day. Texts from morning until midnight. Long phone calls during work commutes. Random memes. Voice notes. Complaints about clients. Confessions about relationships. Normal friendship stuff. At least that's what I thought it was. My daughter called her Aunt C. Not because I pushed it. It just happened naturally over time. Carla came to birthdays. Christmas dinners. School events. She remembered my daughter's favorite candy. She knew how anxious she got before dance recitals and would text her encouragement beforehand. That's what makes this story so hard to explain cleanly. Because Carla didn't feel fake. That's the problem. If she'd felt manipulative, I would have protected myself. But she felt sincere, thoughtful, consistent. She remembered details most people forget. Tiny things. The name of my childhood dog. The professor who embarrassed me in college. Which songs made me cry after my divorce. Who remembers things like that unless they care? See? That question still traps me sometimes. I keep circling back to it. Because if the care was real, then what was everything else? And if the care wasn't real, then honestly I don't know how someone performs humanity that convincingly for 11 years. 11 years. That number still shocks me when I say it. That's not a phase. That's a full chapter of a human life. That's funerals and vacations and emergency phone calls and random Tuesday afternoons sitting in sweatpants drinking wine on somebody's couch. She was there when my marriage finally ended for real. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor crying over paperwork while she rubbed circles on my back and told me I was going to survive this. And the thing that haunts me now is, I think she meant it. That's what's so confusing. I don't think every moment was fake. I really don't. Which almost makes this worse. Because if somebody purely manipulates you, at least the story stays simple. But if somebody loves you and uses you simultaneously? Where do you even put that emotionally? I still don't know. I keep thinking about the day I told my daughter Carla and I weren't friends anymore. My daughter was 17 by then. Old enough to hear tension underneath words. I tried to sound casual. Calm. I said, Carla and I had kind of a falling out. That was it. And my daughter just stared at me. Confused first. Then scared. And I remember this awful sinking feeling hitting me because I realized in that moment that whatever Carla had done to me, she'd also done something to my child. She made my daughter love her too. And I brought her into our lives. No. That's not even accurate. I handed her access willingly. The first time we met was at a work conference. One of those miserable corporate hotel conferences where everybody's pretending networking is fun while secretly checking flight times home. I was standing alone pretending to text somebody because I didn't want to talk to anyone. And Carla walked up beside me and said, "You have the face of someone mentally planning an escape route." I laughed immediately. A real laugh. And honestly, looking back now, that moment bothers me more than it should. Because I remember exactly how relieved I felt meeting her. Like some internal loneliness I'd been carrying suddenly loosened. We talked for 4 hours that night. The hotel bar closed around us. And somewhere during those 4 hours, without realizing it, I stopped scanning her. That's the sentence I keep coming back to now. I stopped scanning. Because what I didn't understand yet, what I couldn't possibly understand, was that some of the most important conversations in our friendship weren't emotional at all. They were informational. And the first real warning sign happened over a bottle of wine at her apartment. But I completely missed what she was actually doing. It was such a normal night. That's the part that still gets me. No dramatic music. No obvious manipulation. No creepy feeling in the air warning me to run. Just takeout containers on the counter. A half-finished bottle of red wine. One lamp on in the corner because Carla hated overhead lighting. She used to joke that overhead lights made women look like they were being interrogated. I can still picture the apartment exactly. And honestly, sometimes I wish I couldn't. Because now every memory feels contaminated somehow. Anyway, we were sitting on her couch talking about work the way we always did. My company had recently announced this major strategic shift internally. Big changes coming. New partnerships. New positioning. Stressful time for me professionally. Exciting too, though. I'd worked incredibly hard to get close to those conversations at that level. And Carla started asking questions about it. At the time it felt harmless. Actually no, not harmless. Supportive. That's the word. It felt like she was interested in me. Proud of me. Curious about my world. And when somebody consistently makes you feel seen emotionally, you stop noticing how much information you're giving them intellectually. That's what happened. She asked things like, how fast are clients transitioning over? Who's leading implementation? What's leadership nervous about? Specific questions. Smarter than casual curiosity. But I didn't notice that then. I just answered her. Freely. God, I answered everything. I remember she kept refilling my wine glass while I talked. Not in some manipulative movie villain way. Just naturally. Comfortably. And I sat there relaxed. Completely open. I keep returning to that image in my head because I miss that version of myself sometimes. The version who could talk without calculating risk. That woman feels very far away from me now. At one point during the conversation, Carla got unusually focused. I remember this clearly now because hindsight sharpens weird details. She asked about timelines again. Then asked whether certain clients already knew the direction shift before public rollout. And I answered. Because why wouldn't I? She was my best friend. That sentence explains almost every mistake I made. I found out 14 months later she'd used parts of that information professionally. Not directly enough to prove anything. Never directly. Carla was too careful for that. But close enough that once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it anymore. And that's really when my brain started turning against me. Because after betrayal, memory becomes unstable. You start revisiting old moments like a detective arriving late to a crime scene. Suddenly tone matters differently. Timing matters differently. Questions matter differently. I started realizing how often Carla guided conversations exactly where she wanted them to go without me noticing. Not aggressively. Smoothly. That's what made her so effective. Nothing about her felt forced. 6 months after that wine night, another moment happened that should have warned me. We were at dinner together. Just the two of us. And I casually mentioned I'd run into a guy named Trevor at an industry event. The second I said his name, something flashed across her face. Very fast. But I saw it. Not fear exactly. Not anger either. Recognition mixed with calculation. Like her brain suddenly accelerated. And then it disappeared immediately. She smiled and said, "Oh, Trevor, yeah, I know him," in this overly controlled casual voice, and changed the subject almost instantly. It was smooth enough that most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But I noticed enough to think about it later that night while washing my face before bed. I remember literally stopping mid-skincare routine and thinking. That reaction was weird. And then I dismissed it. Because that's what trust does. Trust at its reality for you. You explain things away automatically because your emotional investment is already protecting the relationship before your logic fully enters the room. I didn't know then that Trevor had connections close to leadership at my company. I didn't know he'd already passed information to Carla before that wine conversation happened. And I definitely didn't know that when she sat across from me asking all those thoughtful questions. She wasn't discovering information. She was verifying it. That realization hit me almost 2 years later while sitting alone on my couch with my laptop open. And I physically felt sick. Not metaphorically. Actually sick. I had to get up and walk to the bathroom because my stomach flipped so suddenly. Because there's a huge emotional difference between someone impulsively betraying you and someone quietly coordinating around you. One feels reactive. The other feels architectural. Planned. And once I understood that possibility, everything started rearranging itself in my memory. The Portugal trip suddenly felt different. A cancelled weekend that once seemed random now felt suspicious. Conversations about colleagues. Questions about clients. Curious little follow-ups I'd once interpreted as caring attention. Everything started glowing under this horrible new light. I stopped sleeping normally around then. That's another thing I don't think people understand about this kind of betrayal. It becomes physical. I'd wake up at 3:30 in the morning with my heart racing because my brain suddenly connected another old memory to something newer. One night I sat straight up in bed remembering a dinner from 5 years earlier because Carla had asked oddly detailed questions about somebody competing for the same promotion I wanted. At the time I thought she was being supportive. Now I wasn't sure anymore. And the uncertainty is honestly what destroys you. Not knowing. Never fully knowing. People always think the worst part of betrayal is the lie itself. For me, it was ambiguity. Because ambiguity spreads. It infects everything. I started questioning my own instincts constantly. And that terrified me because before Carla, I trusted myself deeply. I've built an entire career reading rooms and understanding people. I'm good at it. Or at least I thought I was. But she got past every defense I had for 11 straight years. That realization damaged my confidence more than I can explain. I kept wondering. Was I lonely enough to ignore obvious warning signs? Did I unconsciously choose comfort over instinct? Or was she genuinely just that skilled at making people feel emotionally safe? I still don't fully know the answer. Probably both. And then there was the promotion. God. That whole situation feels different now too. This was about 4 years into our friendship. I was up for a VP-level role I'd wanted for years. Everyone internally knew I was the frontrunner. Not unofficially. Officially. People congratulated me early. That's how expected it was. And then, about a month before final decisions, the energy shifted. Subtly. Tiny changes. Executives became slightly colder. Conversations shortened. Certain meetings suddenly happened without me. If you've worked in corporate spaces long enough, you can feel those changes before anyone says them out loud. I remember coming home one night with this pit in my stomach telling Carla something felt wrong. And she was incredible. That's the part that still hurts. She comforted me perfectly. Said all the right things. Made me feel seen. Safe. Supported. Then they hired an outside candidate instead. A woman nobody had even heard of 6 months earlier. I was devastated. Humiliated too, honestly. People don't talk enough about the shame attached to professional rejection at that level. Especially when everyone already assumed the role was yours. I cried in front of Carla after that. Really cried. Mascara running, humiliating crying. And she sat beside me rubbing my back saying, "They made a mistake. Something bigger is coming." I believed her completely. 3 years later, I discovered the woman who got that role had consulting ties connected to Carla's firm. Indirect ties. Again, always indirect. Never enough to prove intent cleanly. But enough to make me stop breathing for a second when I saw it. And I remember sitting there staring at my screen thinking, how much had I told her during that process? The answer was horrifying. Too much. Way too much. And what scares me now isn't just the possibility that she used information. It's how willingly I handed it over. No suspicion. No hesitation. Just trust. And I still might have explained all of that away. I still might have kept protecting her in my own head. If that voicemail had never landed on my phone. The voicemail came in on a Tuesday. 6:13 in the evening. I know the exact time because afterward I stared at my phone screen so long the numbers burned into my memory. I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store trying to convince myself to go inside and buy actual food instead of another bottle of wine and crackers pretending to be dinner. Normal evening. Normal life. That's what's strange about traumatic moments sometimes. The world doesn't announce them properly. There's no dramatic feeling beforehand warning you that your reality is about to split in half. My phone buzzed. Voicemail from Carla. I almost didn't listen to it right away because she and I left each other voice notes constantly. Usually dumb stuff. Stories about work. Complaints about clients. Random gossip. But something made me hit play immediately. Maybe instinct. Maybe fate. I don't know. The first 30 seconds were just movement. Car sounds. Rustling. A turn signal clicking faintly. And I remember pulling the phone away from my ear at first because I thought it was an accidental pocket recording. Then another woman's voice entered. Someone I didn't recognize. And right after that, Carla said my name. The second I heard my name, my stomach tightened. Instantly. Not emotionally. Physically. Like my body understood danger before my mind did. Then she laughed. God. That laugh still bothers me more than the actual words sometimes. Because it wasn't cruel. That would have almost been easier. It was casual. Relaxed. The laugh of somebody discussing a manageable problem. And then she said she'd been managing me for years. Managing. I hate that word now. I genuinely hate it. Because it changed shape after that voicemail. It stopped sounding professional and started sounding predatory. She said I was useful. Useful. That word too. And then she said something about a situation she'd been worried about probably blowing over because she didn't think I was going to figure it out. I don't think she's gonna figure it out. That line hit me so hard I stopped breathing for a second. I'm not exaggerating. I literally stopped breathing. I replayed that part immediately. Then again. Then again. Like repetition would somehow alter meaning. It didn't. A woman knocked on my car window at one point asking if I was okay. Apparently I'd been sitting there crying without realizing it. And the insane part is, I smiled at her automatically. I said, yeah, sorry. I'm fine. Fine. Meanwhile, I think my nervous system was actively collapsing. I sat in that parking lot for almost an hour. People walking past carrying groceries. Shopping carts rattling. Life continuing normally around me while my brain kept trying to reject what it had heard. Because here's the part I'm most ashamed of. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was defense. Defense of her. Immediately, I started trying to explain the voicemail away before I'd even finished processing it. Maybe managing meant protecting. Maybe the conversation was about something else entirely. Maybe I was projecting insecurity onto vague language. I performed full emotional gymnastics trying to rescue her from what I'd heard with my own ears. Because accepting the obvious truth meant destroying 11 years of emotional history in one moment. And my brain fought that hard. I drove home eventually, but honestly I barely remember the drive. What I do remember is standing in my kitchen afterward replaying the voicemail over and over while my dinner sat untouched on the counter. At some point around midnight, I started shaking. Not dramatic movie shaking. Small shaking. Like my body was running too much adrenaline through too little space. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next one properly. Or honestly for weeks afterward. I kept replaying the difference in her voice. That's what haunted me most. Not just the words. The absence of performance. The Carla I knew spoke carefully around emotions. Thoughtfully. Intentionally. She always seemed aware of impact. But voicemail Carla? Relaxed. Unfiltered. Certain. Like I was an equation she'd already solved. And once I heard that version of her, I couldn't fully reconcile her anymore. The woman who sat beside me in hospital waiting rooms. The woman who remembered my daughter's birthday before some relatives did. The woman laughing casually in a car about me being useful. How were those people the same person? I still don't know. And honestly, I think trying to answer that question damaged me almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because human beings aren't supposed to split apart that violently in your head. I called her the next day. Not to confront her. God, no. I wasn't emotionally ready for that yet. I called because I needed to hear her voice live. I know how pathetic that sounds. But I needed to know if she still sounded familiar. If maybe hearing her normally would somehow shrink the voicemail into misunderstanding. She answered cheerfully. Hey stranger. Completely normal. And I remember gripping my steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt because the emotional whiplash was unbearable. How could somebody sound exactly the same after your entire perception of them changed overnight? She asked how I was. I said fine. She said work was insane lately but we should grab dinner soon. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Like a complete idiot. But that's the thing nobody explains about betrayal from someone you deeply love. Your emotions don't detach immediately just because your intellect catches up first. Love lingers stupidly. Muscle memory lingers. Habit lingers. Part of me still wanted her approval while another part was terrified of her. That contradiction exhausted me. I started replaying memories constantly after that. Not intentionally at first. It was more like my subconscious started conducting investigations without my permission. The Portugal trip suddenly resurfaced in my head. One night at dinner there, we'd met another couple and Carla spent almost the entire evening talking intensely with the husband while I chatted with his partner. At the time it felt harmless. Now I couldn't stop wondering who he really was. Client? Industry contact? Source? I still don't know. Then there was the recommendation letter. That one genuinely kept me awake at night. Years earlier, Carla had offered to write a recommendation for me for a board position. I'd been touched by that. Flattered. She submitted it directly. I never read it. And after the voicemail, I suddenly found myself lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering, what if she subtly undermined me in it? What if she praised me publicly while privately weakening me strategically? What if? See? That's what this kind of betrayal does. It colonizes memory. Every moment becomes evidence. Every kindness becomes questionable. And there's no endpoint to that process because certainty never fully returns. I stopped trusting my own interpretations completely during those weeks. That scared me more than I can explain. Because before Carla, I always believed my instincts were strong. After Carla, I started wondering whether I'd ever truly understood the people closest to me at all. 6 weeks passed before I confronted her. 6 weeks of insomnia. 6 weeks of listening to the voicemail in secret. 6 weeks of pretending to function normally at work while internally replaying 11 years of friendship like surveillance footage. And by the time I finally asked her to meet me, I was already emotionally destroyed. But what happened at that coffee shop somehow made everything even worse. Because when I showed her the voicemail, she didn't react like someone caught. She reacted like someone adapting. I got to the coffee shop early. 30 minutes early, actually. I told myself traffic might be bad, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was I couldn't sit still at home anymore. I'd spent 6 weeks carrying this thing around inside me like broken glass. Sleeping badly. Forgetting conversations halfway through them. Reading the same email 3 times because my brain kept drifting back into old memories. By that point, I wasn't even functioning normally anymore. I'd started checking people's facial expressions mid-conversation without realizing it. Scanning. Always scanning. And that morning, before meeting Carla, I threw up twice from anxiety. I wish I were exaggerating. I wasn't. I remember standing in my bathroom afterward staring at myself in the mirror thinking, you are about to sit across from someone you loved for 11 years and ask yourself whether any of it was real. That thought alone almost made me cancel. But I went anyway. Same coffee shop we'd gone to for years. Same corner table near the window. And this part still destroys me a little. I ordered her drink automatically. My hands did it before my brain could stop them. Medium oat milk latte. Extra cinnamon. The barista even smiled and said, "Your friend running late today?" I think I smiled back. I honestly don't remember. What I do remember is sitting there staring at those 2 cups while my heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then Carla walked in. Smiling. Normal smile. Warm smile. The exact same smile that had made me feel safe for over a decade. And for one horrible second, I almost folded emotionally right there. That's the part people don't understand. Familiarity is incredibly powerful. Your nervous system remembers safety long after your mind recognizes danger. She sat down and started talking immediately about traffic and work and some client issues she was annoyed about. Completely normal. And while she talked, I remember thinking, how are you doing this? How are you acting normal right now? Meanwhile, I could barely hear her because adrenaline was roaring through my body so loudly. My phone was sitting face down on the table between us. Voicemail already queued. I didn't know how to start. There's no socially acceptable opening line for, "Hey, I think our friendship might have been partially constructed around manipulation." So I just picked up the phone. Turned it around. and hit play. No warning. Nothing. I watched her face the entire time. And honestly, that moment changed everything for me more than the voicemail itself. Because she didn't look shocked. Not really. Careful. That's the word. She looked careful. Like someone mentally rerouting in real time. Fast calculations behind the eyes. And maybe that sounds small, but to me it mattered enormously because panic would have implied surprise. This wasn't surprise. This was adaptation. The voicemail ended. Silence. Then she exhaled once and said, "Okay. I can explain this." 3 explanations came next. 3. I remember them almost word for word because afterward I replayed the conversation obsessively for months. First explanation. I misunderstood the context. The conversation supposedly wasn't about me the way I thought. Different issue. Different meaning. I'd attached emotional interpretation where none existed. Then, when I didn't immediately accept that, she shifted directions smoothly. Second explanation. Protection. She said she'd been managing situations around me professionally because certain people in our industry were difficult and she was trying to protect me from dynamics I wasn't fully aware of. Protecting me. That was the reframe. And here's the humiliating truth. Part of me almost believed her. Even then. Even sitting there with evidence directly in front of me. Because my emotional attachment to her was still alive inside my body no matter what my intellect understood. That's what makes these situations so psychologically disorienting. You can know someone hurt you and still crave emotional reassurance from them simultaneously. It's awful. Then came the third explanation. This one was closer to honesty, I think. Or maybe closer to desperation. She admitted she'd said the words. But she argued everyone manages relationships professionally to some extent. That networking and information flow are complicated. That she'd always cared about me regardless. Regardless. That word physically chilled me. Because regardless means both things existed together. Affection and strategy. Care and usefulness. Love and calculation. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. She genuinely didn't think those things canceled each other out. To her, they coexisted naturally. I interrupted her then. First time during the conversation. I just said her name quietly. Carla. And she stopped talking immediately. I told her I needed her to listen because I didn't think I could survive saying this twice. My voice was shaking. Not dramatically. Just enough that I could hear myself losing steadiness. And I said, I trusted you with parts of myself I never gave anyone else. The second I said that, her eyes filled with tears. Real tears too, I think. God, see? I still qualify everything. I still can't fully commit to my own conclusions. That's what she left behind in me. She started crying harder while I talked. And despite everything, it still affected me emotionally. Because you don't stop loving someone instantly just because they hurt you. Love doesn't operate on morality that way. Sometimes it survives long past evidence. I told her the worst part wasn't even the possible professional betrayal anymore. It was uncertainty. The fact that I no longer knew which memories belonged to me honestly and which ones had hidden motives attached underneath. I said, I don't know what was real anymore. That sentence landed hard. I saw it hit her. And for 1 second, one tiny second, she looked genuinely devastated. Or maybe she realized she'd finally lost control of the narrative. I honestly still can't tell. That's the sickness of this whole thing. Even now I question every emotional reaction connected to her. She started saying she loved me. Over and over. You know I loved you. You know you mattered to me. You know our friendship was real. And sitting there listening to her, I realized something deeply unsettling. I believed she meant those words. Not enough to stay. Not enough to trust her again. But enough to completely ruin the simplicity of being angry. Because if she loved me while also using me, what does that make her? What does that make the relationship? I still don't have language for it. I finally stood up because I physically couldn't stay there anymore. I remember seeing both untouched coffees sitting between us. Mine cold. Hers untouched entirely. And when I walked outside, I suddenly couldn't breathe properly. Not a dramatic panic attack. Something quieter. More physical. Like my body finally collapsing under information my brain had been carrying too long. I sat in my car afterward gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands cramped. And I remember thinking, if she could do this for 11 years without me fully seeing it, what else have I missed in my life? That question damaged me more than I can explain. Because after that, suspicion didn't stay limited to Carla. It spread. Into work. Into friendships. Into myself. And 4 months later, something happened that made the entire situation feel even bigger than personal betrayal. Because I started seeing pieces of my own work showing up in places they absolutely should not have been. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That's how this phase starts, I think. Not with certainty. With self-doubt. I'd see something, a presentation, a proposal, a framework structure, and there would be this uncomfortable familiarity sitting underneath it. Not copy-paste obvious. Nothing that clean. Worse than that. Close enough to feel personal, but not close enough to prove anything. Like someone had taken the way I think and rebuilt it in a slightly different voice. And I'd sit there staring at it thinking, no, that's not possible. Because once your trust breaks in one area of life, your brain doesn't immediately become confident in new conclusions. It swings the other direction first. You start second-guessing your own perception constantly. So I dismissed it initially. Multiple times. But then it kept happening. Different contexts. Different firms. Different materials. Same underlying structure. Same phrasing patterns. Same way of organizing ideas that I used instinctively in my own work. And the sick part is, I started recognizing my own thinking before I recognized the source of it. That's a strange feeling, by the way. Seeing your internal logic reflected back at you from somewhere you didn't authorize. It's like hearing your own voice echo in a hallway you didn't enter. Eventually, a colleague sent me something directly. A consulting proposal from a firm I hadn't heard of. And halfway through reading it, I stopped. Physically stopped scrolling. Because there it was. Not identical. But unmistakably adjacent to my work. The same conceptual framework I had developed over years. The same language scaffolding I used in client positioning. But refined. Repackaged. And at the bottom of the document, Carla's name. Listed as a founding advisor. I just stared at the screen. Completely still. No immediate emotional reaction at first. Just the slow sinking sensation like my body had realized something before my mind was willing to fully catch up. I leaned back in my chair and thought. So it wasn't just personal. That was the first coherent thought. Not anger. Not betrayal. Scale. Because suddenly this wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was about access. Information. Ideas. Years of conversations I had never once considered unsafe. And I started mentally replaying everything. Every dinner. Every trip. Every late-night phone call where I talked freely about work frustrations, strategy shifts, internal decisions, upcoming projects. All of it suddenly felt exposed. Not because it was wrong to share those things, but because I never once considered they could be used outside the context of friendship. That's the gap she operated inside. Trust without friction. I showed what I found to someone I trust professionally. One of the few people I've always considered grounded. She read it slowly. Didn't react immediately. Which honestly scared me more than if she had. And then she said something I'll never forget. I don't know what to tell you. Not reassurance. Not dismissal. Just uncertainty. And that uncertainty did something worse to me than confirmation would have. Because it meant I wasn't overreacting. But it also meant I didn't have closure. I considered legal advice after that. I really did. I had one consultation where I tried to explain everything in structured terms, timelines, overlaps, connections, and even as I was speaking, I could hear how impossible it all sounded to prove. Because influence doesn't leave fingerprints. And neither do conversations. Especially not conversations between people who trusted each other. Everything exists in that gray space where memory becomes evidence and evidence becomes interpretation. And I was exhausted. Completely exhausted. Because I was already carrying too much just trying to understand the friendship itself. Now I was trying to understand whether parts of my professional identity had been quietly absorbed into something else. And the worst realization wasn't even theft. It was access. I gave her access. Willingly. Consistently. For 11 years. No suspicion. No barriers. Just openness. And that's what really started changing me. Not just what she did. But what I had done without realizing the potential consequences. I started thinking differently about myself. Not just her. My judgment. My instincts. My memory. There were nights I'd sit in my kitchen long after everyone was asleep just replaying conversations from years earlier trying to figure out if I had missed signs that were actually obvious in hindsight. And every time I thought I had an answer, I'd find another memory that contradicted it. That's what makes this so destabilizing. There is no stable version of the past once trust breaks. Only competing interpretations. And I was living inside all of them at once. I stopped sleeping properly for a while. Not completely, I functioned, but there was always this underlying alertness running in the background. Like my nervous system had decided the world was slightly less safe than it used to be. Even in ordinary moments. Even in normal conversations. And that shift doesn't go away quickly. It lingers. It becomes default. But the strangest part, the part one still struggled to explain, is that I don't only feel anger when I think about her. I feel grief too. Because I don't know what parts were real. I don't know what parts were constructed. And I don't know if those two categories even matter the way I used to think they did. That question stays with me more than anything else. Was she two people at once? Or did I simply never see all of her at the same time? And after everything, after the voicemail, the confrontation, the professional fallout, I still catch myself missing her sometimes. Not the version that laughed in that car. Not the version in the voicemail. But the version who showed up when my father was sick. The version who held my hand in a hospital waiting room for 8 hours without complaining once. That version felt real. And that's the part one can't resolve. Because if even some of it was real, then the story becomes something much more complicated than betrayal. It becomes coexistence. And I don't know how to emotionally process coexistence like that. I still don't. And I think that's where I am now. Not at the end. Just inside the aftermath. Still trying to understand what was taken. And what I gave away without ever realizing I was giving anything at all. There's a strange thing that happens after something like this. Life doesn't stop. It just continues around the damage. People still text you about dinner plans. Emails still come in with deadlines attached like nothing inside you has changed. And you're standing there trying to act normal while something in your head is permanently rearranging itself. That's what my life became for a while. Normal on the outside. Unstable underneath. And the hardest part wasn't even Carla anymore. It was what she changed in me without touching me directly. I started noticing it first in small moments. Like conversations where someone would laugh and I'd automatically check whether the laughter matched the words. Or compliments that used to land easily now arriving with this tiny delay in my mind, like I needed to verify them before I could accept them. Even with my daughter. I hate admitting this. But even with her sometimes. Not because I don't trust her. But because my system stopped knowing how to distinguish between genuine and strategic without overanalyzing everything first. That's the damage that lingers. Not the person. The reflex. Petra noticed it before I did. We were having dinner one night, nothing special, just a quiet place, low lighting, normal conversation, and I was mid-sentence talking about something personal when I stopped. Just stopped. Because I suddenly realized I was watching her face too closely. Trying to predict her reaction before I finished the thought. She paused and looked at me. Not offended. Just observant. And she asked, gently, "Are you okay right now?" And I said yes. Automatically. Too fast. And she didn't push, but she didn't ignore it either. She just said, "You do that thing sometimes, like you're checking if it's safe to talk." And I remember feeling this immediate shame rise in my chest. Because she was right. And I hadn't even noticed I was doing it. That's the part nobody really tells you about betrayal like this. It doesn't just change who hurt you. It changes how you approach everyone after. It rewires the beginning of connection. The early trust phase becomes something you actively monitor instead of something you naturally enter. And I miss that old version of me more than I expected I would. The version that didn't need internal permission to be open. There are still nights I think about Carla. Not constantly anymore. But in flashes. Sometimes something reminds me of her, a phrase, a tone, a detail someone else mentions, and I'll feel this weird dual reaction. Warmth and discomfort at the same time. That contradiction still confuses me. Because it would be easier if it were only hatred. Or only grief. But it's neither. It's both layered together in a way that doesn't resolve cleanly. I still have the voicemail. Of course I do. I know I should delete it. People have told me that directly. My daughter has said it more than once, carefully, like she's worried I'm keeping myself trapped in something I don't need anymore. And she might be right. She probably is. But I haven't deleted it. Not because I enjoy hearing it. Not because I want to relive it. But because it's the only moment I have where there is no ambiguity. No reinterpretation. No emotional translation required. Just her voice. Unfiltered. Unaware. Saying what she said without knowing I would ever hear it. And after years of questioning my memory, my interpretation, my judgment, that kind of clarity feels almost like proof of reality itself. Even if it hurts. Especially because it hurts. Sometimes I play it when I start doubting myself again. When I begin wondering if I overreacted. Or misunderstood. Or filled in gaps with fear instead of facts. I play it just long enough to remember that I didn't imagine everything. But I never let it run more than once. I can't. Because there's a point where proof becomes pain again if you stay too long. Carla and I haven't spoken in years now. No reconciliation. No final closure conversation. Just distance. Which, in some ways, is its own kind of ending. Incomplete. Unresolved. Still echoing. And I don't know what she thinks about all of this now. I don't know if she ever thinks about me at all. That used to bother me more than it does now. Now it just feels distant. Like another life. Another version of me lived inside that relationship. A version that trusted completely. That spoke freely. That didn't anticipate consequences every time she opened her mouth. I miss her sometimes. And I still don't fully know what that means. Do I miss her? Or do I miss who I was when I believed her? That question follows me more than anything else. Because if the second answer is true, then the real loss wasn't her at all. It was me. And I'm still learning how to live without that version of myself. Maybe that's what healing actually is. Not forgetting. Not forgiving. Just learning how to exist without the person you used to be before you understood too much. There's no clean ending to this. No moment where everything clicks back into place and feels resolved. Just days that are a little easier than the ones before. And nights that still sometimes aren't. And a voice on my phone that I still can't bring myself to delete. Because after everything, after the confusion, the doubt, the loss of certainty, it's the only thing that still feels undeniably real. And I think that's what I'm still holding on to. Not her. Not the past. But the one piece of it I can't talk myself out of. Proof that it happened. Proof that I didn't imagine it. Even if I wish I could.